Okay, without further ado, let's get you into the budget package and share some of the numbers with you. Here we go. How do you spend $200 billion? We're about to tell you. Let's look at some of the important numbers in the budget, starting with Ontario's economic growth. Here's what the budget is forecasting. Quite miserly growth for this year, just 0.2%, but it gets better as we move along. 1.3% next year, and then in the two more out years, 2.5% and 2.4%, so heading in the right direction eventually. How about the deficit? That's one of the biggest stories in this budget. There's been a remarkable improvement in Ontario's economy. The deficit last year came in well better than they expected, only $2.2 billion. For this year, the Treasurer is banking on $1.3 billion in the red. But then, 3 years ahead of schedule, a $200 million surplus in 24-25, and then a $4.4 billion surplus in 25-26. So much more buoyant times they anticipate coming. What's been one of the most difficult economic problems of the last couple of years? Yes, indeed, inflation. Forecast for this year, 3.6%. Next year, though, coming down to more traditional, at least over the past 3 decades, levels. 2.1% in 2024, 2% in 2025. Inflation looks to be, at least that's what they forecast, heading in the right direction. How about the big spending ministries for the 23-24 budget year? Healthcare, of course, always number one. $81 billion allocated for health spending for this fiscal year. That is 40% of all expenditures in the budget. Education comes in second at $34.7 billion. Children and social services at $19.4 billion. And how about this? One-time COVID funding is coming to an end. $0 in this budget specifically for COVID-19. Perhaps an indication that the pandemic, at least the financial approach to fighting it, is coming to an end. Let's do a few more budget highlights here. For example, the Homelessness Prevention Program and Indigenous Supportive Housing Program. There's $200 million plus assigned for that. Public transit infrastructure, we're looking at $70.5 billion over the next decade. And for highways, nearly $28 billion over the next 10 years for that. And one more significant program change, the GAINS program for seniors. That's an acronym for Guaranteed Annual Income Support. The income threshold is going to be raised in July 2024, and it should impact 100,000 more Ontarians on that front. How about the interest we have to pay on the debt of all the deficits we've accumulated in the past? $14.1 billion for that, making total spending $204.7 billion. Ontario's 2023 budget includes historic levels of spending, even as the province wraps up the one-time COVID-19 funding that ballooned budgets for the past 3 years. With us now on the government's priorities this year, from his office in the Frost Block, Minister of Finance Peter Bethlenfalvy, who's also the PC MPP for Pickering Uxbridge and Treasurer. We welcome you back to TVO. It's good to see you again. News tends to be what's new. So let's start with what's new. A balanced budget 3 years before you anticipated. Tell our viewers and listeners, if you would, what factors have gone into your being able to announce that today?
Well, great to be with you again, Steve. And, absolutely, we balanced 3 years faster than we thought even a year ago. And I credit that, a big part of that, to the economic engine of Ontario. You know, when you start to see the amount of building that's going on across this province, the amount of investments that are coming back to this province. You know, for example, Volkswagen, who's never invested in a major facility of any kind in Canada, chose Ontario for their giga battery manufacturing plant. That's a real vote of confidence in the Ontario economy. So when you have a growing economy and more jobs and people working and getting bigger paychecks, and of course that rises all boats, and we've been able to find that point where we can invest in the priorities of infrastructure and jobs in the economy, and at the same time have a fiscal plan to balance the budget 3 years faster than we thought even a year ago is a good thing for all of Ontario.
Well, your opposition critics would say that one of the reasons you're able to balance early is because you're not adequately funding things that needed to be funded. What would you say to that?
Nonsense. Nonsense. I mean, look at the investments that we're making, to support workers right across this province, including working with private sector labor unions to work arm in arm and is funding new training centers so that we can train our skilled trades and our construction workers who have to build all these things. Look at what we're doing to invest in the Skills Development Fund. That's a fund where we're retraining and reskilling almost 400,000 people since we started a couple of years ago. Those are real jobs. Those are good jobs. People feel very rewarded by having these opportunities in the skilled trades, for example. We're also positioning our workers earlier in education. We're working with again, the grade 11 and grade 12 on the dual credit program so that, our children can, if they want to go into healthcare or be an early educator or a skilled trade, they can get credit in grade 11 and 12 for the courses that they take for post-secondary. It's things like that. So I say nonsense in education, nonsense as well in healthcare, an incredible investment in healthcare. We've got great people in our healthcare sector, but we have to keep building the infrastructure, give them modern facilities, and we have to continue to attract, healthcare workers, personal support workers, nurses, physicians, therapists, you name it. So I think we can do all these things, and we put an unprecedented amount of investment because, to have a strong economy, you have to have healthy people.
One more follow-up on this, and that is if you are, in fact, able to balance 3 years earlier than anticipated, and you are saying in the budget that you're going to have a $4.4 billion surplus 3 years from now, would you agree that you've obviously got lots of money to help out, for example, the City of Toronto with its budgeting problems, or maybe the school board with its budgeting problems, and so on, and so on, and so on?
Well, first off, we have to respect the taxpayer in this equation as well. So just let's not forget that we're also representing taxpayers right across this province, while at the same time funding like cities like Toronto right across this province. And let me point to an area where we've been very targeted and responsible in our investments and our spending. And one would be the announcement today for mental health and addiction support. That was the number one ask of the big city mayors representing 70% of the population of Ontario. We've been through a heck of a pandemic the last couple of years, and mental health and addiction, we've increased the funding, not only the absolute levels, but also helping the community mental health providers increasing their base funding by 5%. A huge move. Now let's talk about supportive housing for homelessness and our homelessness prevention program. The City of Toronto said this was their number one ask. They said, I met with the city, I met with John Tory, and this is an area that he was very, very active in, and we had numerous discussions. So supportive housing, supporting wraparound services for people who have had a tough break. We increased the funding there by $202 million per annum of new money. Toronto wanted $48 million. We gave them $48 million. It's going to help Ottawa. It's going to help London. It's going to help Oshawa. It's going to help, Guelph, Windsor, right across the province, because these are the types of things that we're going to do and continue to do in partnership with municipalities.
I know your government is big on electric vehicles, and you've already mentioned the Volkswagen initiative in southwestern Ontario, and there have been numerous others. There are, however, a lot of people who still drive internal combustion cars, and I note that the gas tax holiday that you imposed in previous governments is set to expire at the end of December. Is that to say we're going to see a gas tax increase January 1st next year?
Well, we're always looking at ways to make life more affordable. We have 8 million registered car drivers in Ontario, and a bit of a relief at the pumps when the cost of everything has gone up, is from I'm hearing from a lot of people is something that's very welcome. Inflation's coming down, but it's still high and really kicking in for people. So we're going to continue that measure throughout the end of the year. I look at also the environment that we've got to attract and build this economy so that that's the best thing. If we've got Biden coming up, today from the U.S., they're putting a lot of money into electric vehicle production in the U.S. We have just landed. You mentioned Volkswagen. We've landed a number of investments in this province where our manufacturing sector is coming back. And one of the things we announced in the budget was the Manufacturing Ontario-Made Investment Tax Credit for private companies who are the supply chain for these electric vehicles. That's going to be so critical as we compete. We're not an island here in Ontario, so we've got to have the investment, support our small businesses and our manufacturing supply chain. This will really help places like Windsor and Oshawa and Brampton and, now St. Thomas with the Volkswagen investment.
Let me ask you about seniors issues, and to that end, you are intending to expand the GAINS program. That's an acronym for Guaranteed Annual Income Supplement. 100,000 additional recipients by changing the threshold, at which point people become eligible for this. But I note that you're not imposing this until July of 2024, and presumably the need that they have identified is now, not 16 months from now. So why isn't it happening now?
Well, we're actually doing things right now, and you would know, Steve, that we've doubled that amount of support through 2023. So that's going to help people right now, and that started back in January. So that's in people's pockets. We doubled it so that they could get up to $1,000 additional dollars per person. A seniors couple who qualify, $2,000 in their pocket. Very, very important to support them. We also made another announcement as part of the expansion. On top of the 200,000 or so low-income seniors who qualify today, the additional 100,000 that you just mentioned that would qualify, but we're also indexing it to inflation. No government's ever done that. So there's a lot of things that we'll continue to do. That's just one thing that we're helping low-income seniors in this province. We're putting more money in their pockets by doubling the low individual family tax rebate that we announced last year. That's in there. You mentioned the gas tax. For the people on disability, we've increased the Ontario Disability Support Program, some of whom are seniors, increased that by 5%, indexing it to inflation. And by the way, we're doing all this while providing other services. Nothing gets clawed back. Nothing is impacting their benefits around. And there's many programs and services that we provide low-income seniors and many of the most vulnerable in Ontario.
I probably should not ask you this next question since it's a bit of a personal pet peeve of mine, and that is the amount of electricity subsidization that the taxpayers of this province are doing. And I note in the budget this year, it totals $6.5 billion, which is the highest ever. Treasurer, you and I earn six-figure incomes, and I don't know about you, but when I look at my monthly statement from Toronto Hydro, it actually gives me a $10 deduction on my hydro bill because the taxpayers of Ontario, or I guess you as the government, in your wisdom, believe in this subsidization of my power usage. I can tell you right now, I don't need it. I got a feeling you don't need it, and I got a bigger feeling that that money, for all the people who make six-figure incomes and who live in nice homes, they don't need it either. Why don't you get rid of that and put that money to something more useful?
Well, I'll tell you what, Steve, that's a pet peeve of mine, and I'll explain that. We have the situation because the previous government overpaid for power that we didn't need by some $33 billion. So I have a pet peeve as well. But I'll also say this, and I said this the other day on your podcast, now that we've tabled the 2023 budget, we start working on the 2024 budget, and I listen to all Ontarians, and that includes Steve Paikin. So I'll consider this the first budget consultation on TVO Today.
I'm not sure if we should regard it that way because that might put me in a bit of difficulty, but I do wonder whether or not you think it is a sensible thing to subsidize power usage by people who make a decent income rather than, say, repurposing that money to a better idea. Do you think this is something you really want to tackle going forward? You've been in power 4.5 years, so I'm not sure blaming the previous government still holds water at this point.
Well, the legacy costs are still there, Steve, so I'm going to hold them to account as we navigate through this. But look, that's one aspect. You're raising the means testing opportunity on that. We're looking at the whole energy. We constantly are looking at the whole energy sector, and we have another challenge that we've got to face is that because of our growing economy, because we're building so much infrastructure, guess what we need to power that? Energy and electricity. So our needs are going to be significant, and so that's why we're investing in the electricity solutions for tomorrow, the small modular reactor that we're building in Darlington. That's why we're looking at investing in battery facilities and building electric vehicles right across the province. That's why we're also I talked about in the budget we're investing in the largest electricity battery storage facility in Canada in partnership with First Nations and others. So, there's not just one and done on all these things. There's a bunch of things that we have to do. One thing I know is that we'll continue to look at all ideas, and I don't mean to put you in a difficult position, but you are a citizen of Ontario, so I listen to good ideas right across the province, and so we're gonna, along with my colleagues, continue to focus on how we can be the most competitive, providing electricity, clean energy. By the way, we have a very clean grid. I went to Europe a few months ago. Germany would give their left arm for our clean energy grid, and in fact, that was one of the reasons that Volkswagen is coming to Ontario. We have one of the cleanest energy grids in the world. So we're going to not only, we're not going to rest on the laurels. We're going to keep investing in that grid. And so, we've got a lot more to do, and we're listening to all Ontarians.
Down to our last few minutes here, so let me see if I can sneak in a couple of more questions. This one about health care. I know you and the Financial Accountability Officer, another guy named Peter Weltman, who's actually coming up on our program a little bit later. You guys tangle from time to time on how you see the world, and that's fine. That's all part of democracy. But I note in his most recent study, he said that the province of Ontario needs to create 4,500 new beds for hospitals over the next 6 years. And I note that you, in this budget, are allocating enough money to create 3,000, not 4,500, but 3,000 new hospital beds over 10 years, not 6 years. Why have you decided not to come close to what the FAO says is the target you need to hit if we're going to take care of our population the way we need to?
Well, the FAO has a crystal ball, and they speculate on the future. And I'll say this: we're responsible and accountable for getting it done, building the hospitals, building our healthcare system. We put a lot more money today into home and community care, long-term care, mental health and addiction, supportive housing that I talked about. But look, if you look at his report that said, here's government spending, this is what you need to do, that the FAO thinks, we're actually exceeding what they put in their report a few weeks ago. So I say, look at our numbers. And by the way, the Auditor General always looks at our numbers, and for the last 5 years has given us a clean bill of health. We're going to continue making the investments. The FAO's job is to project out, and that's fine. But my job is to make sure that I deliver the investments for the hospitals, a 4% increase in base funding that I announced today. The increase in home and community care, including the contract rates, some $569 million more a year of new money annually for the next 3 years to help with contract rates and stabilize the delivery of home and community care. Additional funding for mental health and addiction, including a 5% base increase that I know means a lot to the community mental health sector. Investing in our people, our nurses, our personal support workers, as of right, which we put in legislation if passed, will allow healthcare workers from across the province who come here to be able to work right away. We're cutting the red tape. We're making it easier to pursue your dream to be a healthcare worker. Starting in grade 11 and 12, where today I announced the dual credit program where you can take credits there in healthcare and then they'll count for your post-secondary education. So we're doing a lot of things, and I'll stand behind our record any day.
In our last 30 seconds here, I want to ask you a bit of a weird question, admittedly, and that is, I don't know, I've probably seen 40 budget speeches over the years, but you did something today in the legislature I've never seen before, and that is you would announce a program, and then you'd point at somebody, and then you'd make another announcement of another program, and you'd point at somebody else. And I saw you do this several times today, and I thought, what's he doing? Well, I have this chance to ask you, what was that all about?
Well, if I did an announcement in the budget about supporting workers and our great workforce, I'd point to Monty McNaughton. If it was something in healthcare, Sylvia Jones, except she was very close to me, so it's hard to point right at her. I might hit her nose if I had pointed at her. Raymond Cho for seniors, Marilee Fullerton for youth leaving care. I mean, that's such a powerful thing. Michael Tabolo for mental health and addiction. George Peary for mining. Steve, politics is a team sport. You can't get very far if you don't have a team. And so I'm just acknowledging the many people in caucus, in cabinet, right across. And frankly, I acknowledge the federal government, and I thank them, and I think I pointed at the camera. So, I don't know where that came from. You picked that up, and maybe that's a new tradition.
Gotcha. Well, we thank you for continuing our tradition on Budget Night, which is to have the Treasurer spend at least 18 minutes with us. Peter Bethlenfalvy, the Minister of Finance, the PC member for Pickering-Uxbridge, many thanks for joining us from the Frost Block tonight.
Always a pleasure, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.